Isabella and Mateo thought their trip to rural Mexico would be the adventure of a lifetime. Far from the crowded cities, they wanted peace, quiet, and a taste of old history. But what they found was something that had been waiting for them all along. In the crumbling village, the locals never smiled. The church bells rang at the wrong hours, and their rented house seemed to breathe with its own pulse. As night fell, Isabella swore she heard footsteps in the walls, while Mateo found photographs of strangers with their eyes scratched out. By the time they realized the house wasn't empty, it was already too late. Something inside had chosen them. I had always dreamed of visiting Mexico, not for the beaches or resorts that most travelers craved, but for the quiet, forgotten villages where history still clung to the air. I wanted solitude, a place far from the noise of cities. When I found a small house for rent on the outskirts of an old coastal town, I thought I had found exactly what I was looking for. The landlord barely spoke, handing me the keys quickly as if eager to be rid of them. The villagers watched from a distance as I dragged my suitcase up the dusty road. Their faces were sunburned, weathered, and silent. At first, I thought it was just their way. But the longer I stayed, the more I realized their eyes held something else. Pity or fear. The house itself was strange from the beginning. Its walls were painted a faded, flaking red, like dried blood beneath years of sunlight. The air inside smelled of earth and salt, as though the ocean had soaked into the plaster. The furniture looked untouched, as though someone had lived there only days ago. Old wooden chairs sat by the window, a dusty lamp in the corner still filled with oil, a pair of shoes by the front door. It felt less like a rental and more like a home someone had abandoned in a rush. Even the cupboards were not completely empty. I found plates, cups, and a rusted knife left behind. The first night I struggled to sleep. I lay on the old bed, staring at the ceiling fan that barely moved the heavy air. The silence was overwhelming, broken only by the faint chirping of insects outside and occasionally the distant sound of music from the village square. Just when I thought I might drift off, I heard it, scratching. It came from above me, deliberate and steady, not the quick scurry of an animal, but slow, dragging strokes across wood. I held my breath, straining to listen. The sound continued for several minutes, then stopped the moment I shifted in bed. The silence that followed was worse than the noise. It felt like something was waiting. By morning, I convinced myself it was nothing. Rats, maybe, or a loose branch against the roof. I tried to laugh at my nerves, but when I opened the front door, I froze. 3 strange symbols had been carved into the wood during the night. They looked like overlapping triangles, each marked with a vertical line down the middle. The cuts were fresh, the wood still raw at the edges. I was certain they hadn't been there when I arrived. My skin prickled as I traced them with my finger. That day, I walked into the village, hoping to find answers. The people didn't speak to me, but they stared. When I passed the old church in the square, an elderly woman muttered something under her breath and turned away, making the sign of the cross. The priest watched me from the doorway, his eyes fixed on me until I left. No one offered a smile. No one asked where I was staying. It was as if they already knew and wanted no part of it. When night fell again, the scratching returned. Louder this time, closer, as if whatever was on the roof had moved inside the walls. I lay frozen, my ears straining, my heart pounding. Minutes dragged into hours. Then I noticed a dark stain forming on the ceiling above me. It spread slowly, thick and unnatural, glistening in the pale moonlight. At first, I thought it was water, but when it dripped onto my blanket, I felt the warmth of it. It wasn't water. It was heavier, darker. I forced myself to look up. The stain spread into a shape, lines forming, curves bending until I saw it clearly. A face. Hollow eyes, a wide mouth, features pressed into the ceiling as though something was trapped inside, bleeding through the wood. The liquid dripped onto my chest, warm and sticky, soaking into my shirt. I couldn't scream. I couldn't move. I just stared at that awful forming face until the weight of the silence crushed me, and then, as if acknowledging me, the mouth on the ceiling opened. I woke the next morning drenched in sweat, my chest still sticky where the black liquid had fallen. The ceiling above me looked unchanged, no stain, no trace of the face I had seen. The sheets were clean, though I remembered feeling the drops soak into me. For a moment, I questioned my own mind. Had I been dreaming, hallucinating? Yet the weight of dread in my chest told me it had been real. Something had shown itself to me, and the house had swallowed the evidence by daylight. I forced myself out of bed and tried to distract my thoughts by exploring more of the house. The walls were cracked, the floorboards creaked, but there was a strange order to everything. The furniture was arranged in a way that suggested someone had left abruptly, not carelessly. On a small table in the living room, I found a collection of old photographs in frames. Most showed families standing in front of the very house I was in. Their smiles faded with age, the edges of the paper curling. But one photograph stood out. A group of villagers gathered in the yard, their expressions stiff and unnatural. And across every single face, the eyes had been marked out. Thick black smudges covered them, not faded with time, but dark and deliberate, as if someone had painted over them with fresh ink. I placed the picture back quickly, but the feeling it gave me stayed, a heaviness in my stomach, like a truth I wasn't ready to face. That night, I decided not to sleep in the bedroom. I carried a blanket into the living room and set myself up on the couch. I kept the lamp on, its dim orange glow a weak comfort against the shadows gathering in the corners. Midnight came and I tried to read, anything to keep my mind occupied. That was when I heard it. Footsteps. Slow, careful, unmistakable. They echoed softly down the hallway that led from the back of the house. My body stiffened. Each step was measured, as though someone barefoot was walking deliberately toward me. I gripped the edge of the blanket, frozen, listening as the sound drew closer, then stopped just beyond the edge of the lamp's glow. I lifted my head, my eyes straining into the darkness. The hallway was empty, the shadows still. Yet I felt a shift in the air, a coldness that seeped into my skin. It smelled faintly of damp earth, the same rotten, wet scent I had noticed in the walls. I sat motionless for what felt like hours, the silence pressing down on me. When sleep finally dragged me under, it was not restful. I woke on the floor at dawn, my head throbbing, my body aching. At first, I thought I had simply rolled off the couch, but when I sat up, I saw them. Footprints. They began in the hallway, dark and wet, trailing across the wooden floor. Each one clear and defined, the shape of bare human feet pressed into the boards. They led straight to where I had been sleeping, stopping just in front of the couch. The last footprint was larger than the rest, as if whoever it belonged to had paused there, standing over me while I slept. I felt bile rise in my throat. My hands shook as I followed the prints backward, back down the hallway. They ended abruptly at the far wall, disappearing as though whoever left them had simply stepped into solid wood. The rest of the day, I couldn't stop replaying the sound of those footsteps in my mind. Each detail burned into me, the rhythm, the pause, the sense of being watched. I couldn't deny it anymore. Someone, or something, had been inside the house with me, and it wasn't hiding. It wanted me to know it was there. When night fell again, the silence pressed heavier than before. I sat in the same chair, the same lamp flickering weakly beside me, waiting. Hours passed, but there were no footsteps this time. Only the sound of the wind outside and the occasional groan of the house. I almost convinced myself nothing would happen until I glanced toward the hallway mirror. I saw my reflection, sitting rigid in the chair, the blanket pulled around my shoulders. But behind me, standing in the shadows, was another figure. and its eyes were nothing but black voids. I wanted nothing more than to leave that place. By morning, I had packed what little I had brought with me and stepped out onto the dirt road. The air was sharp, the sun bright, and for a moment, I felt almost foolish for my fear. But when I reached the end of the street where I had first arrived, no taxi came. I waited under the blistering heat, my bag at my feet, scanning the horizon. No vehicles, no voices, not even the sound of animals. The village felt deserted, though I could see faces peering at me from behind shuttered windows. I tried to wave to call out, but the moment I did, the curtains fell closed. Every door in the square was locked. Even the small convenience shop I had visited on my first day was boarded up, as though the entire town had decided at once to turn its back on me. I followed the road further, determined to find a bus or someone who could help me, but the path seemed wrong. No matter how far I walked, I found myself circling back to the same weathered church with its bell tower looming high and silent. The symbols I had seen on my door were painted on its walls too, dark and jagged. My chest tightened when I realized every way out was closed to me. I returned to the house, defeated, only to find the front door wide open. I knew I had locked it before leaving. My suitcase, which I had carried with me, was gone. The furniture inside had been rearranged, turned to face the walls. The photographs on the shelves had been flipped down, every smiling face hidden. Everyone except for a single frame left upright on the center table. It was the photograph I had seen before, the one with black smudges over the eyes. But this time it was different. The faces weren't strangers anymore. In the middle of the group, standing among them, I saw myself. My body, my clothes, my face unmistakable. And like the others, my eyes were painted black. I dropped the frame in shock, and the glass cracked across my reflection. My pulse hammered in my ears. I knew I hadn't imagined it. The paint was wet when I touched it, staining my fingertips dark. That night I sat awake in the living room, trembling under the dim lamplight. The scratching returned, this time not from above, but inside the walls themselves. Long, desperate clawing noises like fingernails ripping through the wood, moving closer and closer to where I sat. I pressed my back against the couch, listening as the sound traveled, first behind me, then beneath the floorboards, then directly beside me. And then, silence. The air grew heavy, pressing down on me. A cold draft blew from nowhere, bringing with it the damp, suffocating smell of soil. I tried to convince myself I was imagining it, but when I turned to the window beside me, I saw something that froze my blood. The reflection in the glass was wrong. The room behind me looked the same, but I was not alone. A figure stood directly behind my chair, tall, with its head bowed so that its face was hidden. Its hands rested on the back of my seat, fingers long and skeletal. I couldn't breathe. I couldn't move. Slowly, I turned my head to look over my shoulder. The room was empty. Nothing stood there. But when I looked back at the reflection, the figure was still there. And this time, it raised its head. Where its eyes should have been were gaping black holes, and within them, faintly glowing, I saw shapes moving, faces. Dozens of faces, their mouths stretched wide in silent screams, trapped in the void where its eyes should be. The glass trembled as though something on the other side wanted to come through. I stopped trusting the mirror after that night. I covered it with a sheet, but I knew whatever I had seen wasn't gone. The house seemed to breathe around me now, groaning in the stillness, shifting in ways I couldn't explain. Shadows moved across the floor even when no light was there to cast them. Sometimes I thought I heard whispers, soft and faint, like dozens of voices speaking at once from behind the walls. I pressed my ear against the wood once, and what I heard chilled me, muffled cries like people buried alive. My sleep became fractured, short bursts of unconsciousness followed by long hours of staring into the dark. One morning, when I finally managed to drag myself out of bed, I noticed my hands. They were black with dirt, my fingernails packed with soil. I didn't remember leaving the house, but when I stepped outside into the yard, I saw it. Near the fence, the earth had been disturbed. A long patch of ground freshly turned, the dirt soft and uneven, like a shallow grave waiting to be filled. My heart dropped as I stared at it. I tried to tell myself I hadn't done it, that I had been sleepwalking, but I couldn't shake the feeling that the house was using me, that I was doing its bidding without even knowing it. I went back inside, determined to stay awake, to resist whatever was happening to me. But the house had other plans. I tried to leave again, to follow the road until it led me somewhere, anywhere, away from that cursed place. But the village seemed to shift when I walked through it. Streets that had once been familiar bent in strange directions. Paths that should have led out brought me back to the same corner. No matter how many turns I took, I ended up standing before the red house. The villagers were gone now. I didn't see faces in the windows anymore. The church bell rang, even though the tower stood empty, its hollow chime echoing through the deserted square. Inside the house, I searched desperately for answers. In one of the drawers, beneath yellowed papers and rusted keys, I found more photographs. These were different, older, darker. They showed people I didn't recognize. Men, women, even children, all standing in front of the red house. Every single one had their eyes blackened out. But something about the sequence made my stomach twist. Each photo showed fewer people than the last, as though they had been taken one after another, the group slowly shrinking, until finally the last photograph showed only one figure standing alone before the house. When I turned it over, my breath froze. It was me. The image was sharp and recent. I recognized the clothes I had been wearing just days before. My face stared back at me, lifeless, my eyes smeared into darkness. I dropped the photograph and stumbled back, bile rising in my throat. How could there be a picture of me? Who had taken it? The house seemed to tighten around me after that, as if it had been waiting for me to see the truth. The whispers in the walls grew louder, more insistent, though I could never make out the words. At night, the scratching turned into pounding, as though something trapped inside the wood was trying to break free. The floor vibrated with it, shaking beneath my feet, until I thought the whole structure would collapse. I covered the mirrors, turned away the photographs, shut every door, but it didn't matter. The presence followed me. When I closed my eyes, I felt it leaning over me, watching. When I walked through the rooms, I caught glimpses of movement just out of sight. My reflection no longer obeyed me. Sometimes, when I looked by accident, it lingered longer than I did, smiling faintly, blinking when I hadn't. I don't know how many days have passed. The clocks in the house stopped working, and the light outside no longer feels like day or night. It hangs in a gray haze, neither morning nor evening, a colorless sky pressing down on me. I don't eat anymore. I don't feel hunger. I don't sleep either, though sometimes I wake on the floor without remembering when I lay down. Time has unraveled inside this house, and I am caught in its threads. The whispers have grown clearer. They no longer sound muffled, no longer trapped behind the walls. They follow me from room to room, circling me, weaving through my thoughts. Sometimes they speak my name, stretching it long and low until it becomes something unrecognizable. Other times I hear laughter, faint and cruel, as if dozens of mouths are pressed to my ears, mocking me. When I cover my head, the voices grow louder, filling every corner of my skull. I thought of the grave again. I couldn't stop myself. My hands itched to dig, and before I knew it, I was outside in the gray light, clawing at the dirt with my bare fingers. The soil was soft, damp, easy to tear through, and the smell of rot burned my nose. My fingernails split, the skin of my palms bled, but I couldn't stop. Finally, I uncovered it. Not a body, not bones, a photograph. It lay perfectly framed, untouched by the earth. the glass clean and shining as though it had been placed there only moments ago. My breath caught when I lifted it. It was me again. My face, my clothes, even the cuts on my hands, exactly as I was now. My eyes, as always, smeared into black voids. I dropped it, stumbling back, dirt clinging to my hands and knees. The ground seemed to tremble as though the house itself laughed at me. I ran inside, desperate, frantic. But the house was no longer what it had been. The furniture was gone. The photographs were gone. The walls were stripped bare, their paint peeling to reveal rotting wood beneath. The floor sagged as though hollow underneath, and the ceiling above dripped with that same dark stain I had seen before. But there was one thing left: the mirror in the hallway. The sheet I had thrown over it was gone, though I never touched it. The glass gleamed, waiting. I wanted to turn away, to run, but my body moved against my will. My feet dragged across the boards, carrying me closer until I stood directly in front of it. At first, I saw only myself, pale, trembling, my eyes sunken deep into my skull. But then, behind me, others appeared. Dozens of them, maybe hundreds, crowding into the reflection. Faces I recognized from the photographs, villagers from the group shots, strangers whose images had stared back at me with blackened eyes. They stood in a mass, silent, watching. Their mouths opened, but no sound came. Their eyes were voids, just like mine had been in the pictures. I spun around. The hallway was empty, only the house, creaking, breathing, but in the reflection, they remained. And then I saw myself in the glass, but not as I was. My reflection didn't mimic me anymore. It stood taller, its lips curling into a smile I couldn't feel. The skin on its face seemed to ripple, as though something inside pressed against it, waiting to come through. Its eyes were two pits of endless black, and deep within them I saw movement, faces shifting, screaming silently, pressing against the darkness. My reflection raised its hand and pressed it to the glass. My own hand lifted without me willing it. I pressed my palm against the mirror, and the glass was warm. My reflection leaned forward, whispering, though no sound came. But I understood it. "Welcome back." The words weren't spoken. They bloomed inside my head, heavy and final. The glass cracked under my hand, a thin fracture spreading outward like a web. My reflection grinned wider, its mouth opening impossibly large, teeth sharp and endless. The faces behind it leaned closer, pressing against the crack, eager, desperate. I pulled back, but my hand stuck. The glass clung to my skin, pulling, dragging me toward the surface. The crack widened, and from within, the whispers erupted into screams. My reflection's mouth moved again, and though it made no sound, I felt the word tear through me like ice. "Stay." The glass shuddered, splintering as if it would shatter and pull me through completely. I fought, I screamed, but the house swallowed the sound. No one could hear me. No one ever would. And then everything went silent. Now, as I write this, I don't know if I'm still in the house. I don't know if I've crossed into the reflection, or if the reflection has come into me. The walls look the same, but the air is thicker, darker. When I look at my hands, I no longer recognize them. The skin doesn't feel like mine. The whispers have stopped, but I can still see them. Faces in the corners, eyes like pits of black, watching, waiting. I was never a visitor here. I was always part of this place. And I think now so are you.